So just a little background on Eric. He co-founded Tender Greens in 2006 in Culver City as a chef-driven, organic, quick casual restaurant concept, and he has now 17 locations and counting, plus the one at the airport, so that makes 18. And he's also the founder of the Tender Green Sustainable Life Project, which is a program aimed at assisting at-risk youth in developing new skills and career intentions through structured culinary training and farm exposure. And I will let Eric take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you. So just real quick, I've been excited about controlled farming systems since I visited Epcot Center about 30 years ago. And then about 7 years ago, I started working with a farmer down in San Diego around aquaponics and was really taken by the romance of that. And then more recently, have been working with our partners out in Oxnard, Scarborough Farms, on piloting a program so that we can prepare to scale outside of California. And the key there is not just to scale tender greens, but to scale, let's call it the California farm experience. And that's the code that we're trying to crack. So if I had it all my way, we would have controlled growing environments that produce organic food at a price point that is in line with what Scarborough can grow for us currently, and at a quality level or better than what we're currently getting, which is it's a high measure, it's a high charge, but we're ambitious. Today, I'd like everybody to go down the line and introduce themselves and what they do. And what we're going to try and do is stay focused more on farming as a business. I think we all heard that farming is tough work. We get into it for a number of different reasons, much like the restaurant business, and then find that it's less profitable than we ever anticipated. So we'd really like to drill down on the economics of farming as it relates to, let's call it farming 2.0, or controlled growing systems in the urban environment. So, Colin?
My name is Colin Archplay. My wife and I founded Archie's Acres in 2006 timeframe. And Archie's Acres is it's a small farm currently located in San Diego. And we're unique in that we're trying to coin the frame hydro-organics. So we're a soilless hydroponic farm, but we've been certified organic since we started as well. So we're incorporating organic techniques with soilless and controlled environment technology. It's very intriguing for us, and we've done that for several reasons, but primarily we're trying to be a consumer-driven company, grow what is not available, but what the customer is looking for. And what controlled environment allows us to do is grow those crops, particularly out of season when it's at the highest demand. And there's less competition from foreign and domestic competitors. We also have a training program called VSAT, or Veteran Sustainable Agriculture Training. It's a coordinated effort between us and Cal Poly Pomona's School of Ag. And the heart of the program was because we're a military family, was transition service members into sustainable agriculture as a career. I think we've talked about a lot of the challenges facing sustainable agriculture, but I'm one that's very optimistic about the opportunity. I'm glad that we get to talk a little bit about that today. Not that it's easy, but there's a lot of space for entrepreneurs who understand both how to produce a crop, but understand the marketplace and the economics behind it as well.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's David. I'm with Evo Farm, and about 4 years ago we built possibly the first aquaponic system in the city of LA, and I called it a greenhouse, but today I laugh at that. It was about the size of a 2-car garage, and it had absolutely no climate control in it, but it did look and resemble a greenhouse. It's actually more of a high tunnel. But if it was optimized in that space, we could produce about 10,000 plants in the space of about a 2-car garage. So it's even when it wasn't working well, it still packed a punch. And along the way, had a lot of distractions. Got really passionate about farms and schools and building, large, more elaborate systems on campuses, and seeing the value of school farm education. And also along the way, I gave tours to thousands of people, and people come and look at this thing. And it's really big, and not a lot of people have an extra 2-car garage on their house where they can grow more food. And so more out of response to this thing that people want to catch the excitement of aquaponics, to develop a product line called Nano Farms, incubated that over a 2-year period, and it actually soft launched. And the response to it has been actually much greater than we'd kind of ever expected and probably hoped. And because really it's just a side project, but when we actually don't have the capacity to meet the demand for these products, so we're actually planning to unload that in the beginning next year, and get back to our roots, which why I started, which is to be a real farmer. And I've working with a number of technology partners who are in the process of elevating aquaponics to be commercially viable.
Fantastic. Hi, my name is Eric Elistad, and thank you for getting this together, Robert. It's a fantastic conversation that's gone on today. I'll start with my background. Originally from a manufacturing company, selling products into the perishable logistics space, so kind of born and bred into the challenges with moving a perishable crop thousands of miles and the spoilage rates associated with that business. Branched out from there to work with some early stage investment groups, developed an investment thesis around food, water, energy, and logistics as global challenges to move us into the 21st century. Found indoor farming through that process and saw the opportunity to bring some of these budding technologies to play in an integrated fashion to tackle some of these global food system issues. So with that, launched Local Roots with a group of technologists and entrepreneurs that I knew to bring together some of these cutting edge technologies like recirculating hydroponic systems to increase and maximize the yield density and the resource efficiency that comes with these growing systems, as well as the water savings associated with them as well as translating from the greenhouse industry into this closed loop system controlled environment practices to create perpetual production in fall, winter, summer, spring, year-round at consistent costs to deliver high-quality products here in Los Angeles as well as on the East Coast in geographies that traditionally had a challenge to grow any type of agriculture locally. And then creating the integrated control systems to automate and create distributed networks of these farms to enable urban farming and distributed agricultural production to tackle some of these food system issues like spoilage rates, 1,000-mile-long supply chains, food deserts, and lack of agricultural jobs in urban environments when almost half of our population lives in these cities. So with the yield density that comes from these production systems, you can really generate the economics that makes sense to begin to enter the mainstream distribution channels, which I think is where the conversation started to go this morning, was how do you create scalable, financially sustainable business models around these sustainable farming techniques. So look forward to being part of that conversation today.
Well, then let's, while you have a rhythm, let's start with you on that, because there are really smart people working in this space. They're producing awesome stuff, and then it's 2 or 3 times the cost of conventional or organic. How do we get it so that it's in line with, let's say, the organic options at the local level?
Yeah. Our solution is to maximize the production per, traditionally it was square foot, but now as we go vertical, you're looking at cubic foot. So maximizing the throughput of your capital expenditure on these equipment and getting perpetual production. So instead of 2, 3, or 4 harvests a year, increasing that to 16 to 20 in the greenhouse industry, and even above that, closer to 30. You can start generating these revenue streams off of this capital equipment to generate a profitable business model. So I think tuning the farming process to these technological advances in order to create a more economical way to farm food and in geographies that were never possible before.
Great. David, do you want to follow up on that?
Are you referring to the $3.50 head lettuce and plastic clamshell at most organic stores in town?
Well, I think those are coming out of probably Go Green, who's actually doing this pretty successfully, but I'm looking at broader product mix. And yeah, $3.50 for a head of lettuce. It's probably in the packaging also that the
It's
cost.
about 25 cents in the packaging
Yeah.
for that, not including the box, which would add more to it. But I mean, that's a loaded question. I mean, there's one approach is you look at your business model, not the technology side, but how you value profit. So like our first project in San Francisco is incubated as a social enterprise where breaking even is an acceptable outcome. So that means it covers all the expenses and paying people whatever fair market wages for their work, but we don't have to focus on specific returns to investors. It's actually funded by a nonprofit, but so that's one way to approach it. I mean, can't we talk about like the real cost of growing food? You know, that's really what we're talking about. Like,
Well, I think there has to be a balance, right?
Right.
So there's the real cost, and we heard examples of that today. You know, good food, local food costs money. It's different than commodity or conventional. I think we all get that. But there's also a reality in the marketplace that not everybody can, and Dwight, don't take this personally, not everybody can go to Whole Foods, right? And how do we, in a sense, democratize local food so that we have a broader audience, so that it isn't, precious little lettuces at Providence or in-kind donations to the underserved?
And just because it's a nonprofit doesn't mean it's in donation. I mean, it's people paying for it. What I do mean is that we don't have to have a 20 or 30% return or whatever the number is. We can say that we can pay people full market wages for their labor, pay fair value for the price of food even at $1.99 for whatever it is for some exotic romaine. But it means that the company itself doesn't have to pay back investors. It can reinvest in itself or in its community by expanding that model of letting food leave its door at cost. That's what I mean. This is one example. I'm not saying it's the only way.
No, I get that. Colin, what do you have to add to that?
Well, I think in terms of cost, if you're selling a head of lettuce at $3.50, but people are buying it, you don't really have a problem, right? The problem is when you sell a head of lettuce at $3.50, but nobody's buying it. And in California, when Salinas, California is lettuce capital of the world, it's really hard to sell anything at that rate when you're competing with that. So I think the reason why I got into controlled environments is because I think it's a key part, I should say, of sustainable agriculture. The challenge with controlled environments is the barrier to entry is a startup cost to build a controlled environment agricultural system, which means part of being an entrepreneur means you need to come up with innovative financing vehicles to bridge that gap. B, the cost of your expenditures of operation is a key sign of whether or not you're sustainable. If it costs you $3 to produce a head of lettuce, but it's growing the guys in Salinas is costing 75 cents, you need to look at how much energy you're using and how much water you're using, how much all these other expenditures, because that cost of inputs is a sign that you're probably using too many inputs to produce your product. You're not probably on the right track of sustainability.
I can just pick it up. So I'm talking about one extreme is the nonprofit side. The other side is elevating technology. And one of the models we're looking at is a food waste conversion technology coming out of USC right now, from taking food waste, going to feeding that to insects is feeding that to fish, feeding that to plants. And that's been done like on Google everywhere. Everyone's doing it at a backyard scale, but talking about doing that at a utility scale. And when you start looking at all these different inputs and outputs, that the revenue model suddenly becomes more attractive because you can, if 3 years ago I sat here, I said, a business has to rely entirely on plant revenue. And then I started becoming very enamored by aquaculture. And that turns out that there's a huge opportunity there in the United States to grow more fish locally. And so now all of a sudden I can emphasize fish revenue. And now I can actually, if you look at it as a whole entity, that I can make a little bit less money on that lettuce, knowing that the fish is going to offset that. And then when you go a little bit deeper, you realize that there's additional outputs that come out of this process, including I can actually produce my own hydroponic fertilizers. It becomes really an economy, quoting Dan about an economy of scope versus scale, vertically integrated technology. And we can't work insularly. We have to work collaboratively, and sometimes it's multiple entities working together to actually get that price of lettuce down for an average consumer to afford.
Yeah, I think that's a great point of creating multiple channels of revenue, particularly with fish, which is another problem. You know, the waterways are fished out, and aqua farming is questionable at best these days.
Well, and I would also say it's matching the opportunity to the business model and the technology. There's some very, very high-tech, high-cost technologies out there that can grow food potentially in space. That doesn't necessarily make sense here in California. We have an abundant supply of sunlight. So, and also understanding your marketplace. Who's the customer? What do they want? What are the trends? And what is the price point that they are used to purchasing at? So tailoring your system design and the technology and the business model to the market opportunity can create profitable opportunities, I think, here in California, as well as across the U.S. internationally, especially looking at water-starved nations and nations that live in conflict zones with food security issues around supply chains. Depending on the opportunity, you might design a different business model and a different go-to-market strategy and different product.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. You talked about growing product out of season because you're in a controlled system, but also earlier there was some talk around marketing, right? Too often we grow something and then we go out and try and market it and hope somebody buys it, versus identifying exactly who the customer is, what the need is, and then growing or building around that. Colin, can you?
Yeah, you know, our business model is we always try to be a consumer-driven company, meaning find out, A, what the consumer needs, and then the second thing we try to do is figure out what's very difficult to grow. Because it's difficult to grow, then by definition, there's less competition in that space. And when you're small, you have to approach those markets. Also, if it's difficult to grow, it means your product has more value. And if you combine a product that has higher value due to lower supply, and you have innovative agricultural techniques that allows you to lower your input costs, such as water reduction, energy inputs, whatever the case may be, I believe that creates a model for success. But not to take away, you still have to build your brand, tell your story, and do all that marketing piece, along with having a unique product with less competition and potentially doing it out of season.
That's the key point right there. Last thing is that you can with climate control environment, you can actually straddle your seasons. You know, extend it. Start. You know, the first time I took tomatoes to a farmer's market, I was embarrassed because they looked so silly. They were flawed and they weren't perfect, but they sold out before everything else did, and before they even opened, they were sold. And it occurred to me that it was like, you know, it was late February, early March, I think is what it was, and I was the only tomatoes in the market that day. You know, so you can start early and late, and that extra month on either side or 6 weeks on either side, that's, you know, it's like that in a restaurant. You get an extra table or two. That's where your money is, right? So you can extend, you know, control Mother Nature a little bit.
And what are the marketing challenges around that? Let's say a really good tasting tomato in February when it should be out of season, particularly in California where everybody's super sensitized to microclimates.
I can tell you from the perspective of my niece. My wife is French, and one day I was trying to spoil my in-laws with I mean, how do you spoil the French with a California cuisine? But I decided we were going to make a meal, and we just splurged with all the ingredients, and went to the store, Carrefour, and we, you know, I was just sat back and let them enjoy. And this little 8-year-old girl, she said, you know, something to the effect of like, you know, what nerve you have to serve this to us? It's like it's a shame. I'm like, what is it, like spoiled or something, rotting food? And she says, oh no, because you understand this is January and you brought tomatoes here, and obviously it came from North Africa, and like, you know, shipping, I mean, seriously, you know. So marketing is a challenge to people who understand where food comes from, but to everybody else, who cares, right?
And Eric, how do we bridge the gap between technology, right, and let's say producing or almost, and I hesitate to say this, but manufacturing food, and holding on to the romance of food and the true expression of the seed varietal that we're growing, so that it performs on the plate and it is something that is differentiated, not just because maybe it is grown in a longer season, but it also tastes better.
Well, and I think these types of technologies, what they offer is a very compelling story. I mean, as urbanites, most of us, this room is an exception, but are very divorced from our food and where it came from, how it was grown, what that means, and why that's important. So I think these technologies enable agriculture to come back to the city, create good, high-quality, green-collar jobs, connect people with their food, teach them where it came from, use less resources, teach them about sustainable agriculture and what that means and why that's important. So I think the marketing ties into the stories around the benefits. Whereas if you look at the production process, it might seem foreign for those of us that are used to growing in soil. But the benefits as far as creating self-sustaining cities and a more robust food system, it's going to take conventional agriculture. It's going to take greenhouses. It's going to take aquaponics. It's going to take hydroponics. And it might take food production on Mars someday. But all of these components are going to tie together to create a more robust food system and a local food system, and that's where the value is. And I think that's where the story is. You can deliver the high-quality tomato or head of lettuce every month of the year, and it was grown locally. I think that is the story that's compelling to the consumer and to the food chain in general.
And if I can add to, bringing these other unique varieties into the marketplace and how do you get people to adapt them? I think that's a relationship where the producer and the chef is so important, because I think chef drives a lot of those eating trends. And so if you can convince a chef why this particular variety of basil, whatever it is going to make him a unique plate of pesto or caprese or whatever it is, and they get in their store and their consumers start understanding what's different about that plate compared to that restaurant's competition, then you start building that market space. But also it forces the grower to do things like demos in the stores, be participants at the farmers markets, even though it may not be a big revenue driver, but to get your product that's unique into the mouths of the consumers. And that is something that a small scale grower can do. If you have a big farm up in the valley, you cannot come down to LA and market your product. Maybe you can afford to do that. Maybe you can pay employees to do that. But I think the consumer wants to see the farmer's face. So that farm family being in the store, doing demos, working with the chef, trying to get their name on the menu and that unique product on the menu is how you convince people to try those different varieties.
Great. And then let's say you start to get your products on the menu. It's in the markets. How do you scale? How do you take your business model and scale it so that you reach more mouths and more communities and, let's say, more cities? Eric, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I think it takes a new business model approach, and I'm glad that Bright Farms is here. They're innovating from the greenhouse side to figure out how to tap into the capital markets to actually harness the power of capitalism and in this robust financial system that we have in America. How farmers frequently struggle to put that to work. So how do we create business models that are scalable, and by being scalable, financeable? If they're financeable and you can have a distributed network of operations that all performs at that high level, that's a replicable business model that can scale across the country and potentially the world.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, for one, it takes a lot of Excel and running spreadsheets in order to scale your business. Because at the end of the day, you still have to access capital. And I think for many growers, we don't go into it thinking that mindset of, I got to treat this like everybody else treats their business. And, a CEO's job is not only managing the company and making sure everything's good for today, but it's taking the company where it needs to go tomorrow. And that's accessing the financial markets. And, Archie's Acres is in a private capital fundraising round right now. We're a for-profit company, and so we're using these kind of traditional funding pieces that most companies do when they have to scale. But it's all in the numbers, right? If you have a profitable farm model, then you potentially have a scalable model, and you just got to run the spreadsheets and then try to bridge that gap of accessing the capital. But these days, I would argue that investors are looking to put their money in agriculture. There's a lot of money that wants to come into agriculture, looking for the future of agriculture. Again, I think it's really bright. The market continues to grow, and I don't just mean here in Southern California. I mean globally, there's going to be more mouths to feed tomorrow than there is today. So that's market opportunity for farmers. And so, you know, a lot of it's networking, doing the numbers, putting the financial documents together, getting a lawyer to package it all for you, and then coming to events like this and pitching over and over again.
David, is there a disruptive model out there? Is there an Uber in the controlled growing space?
I mean, if it's not in ground, it's disruptive, right? It's everything we're doing is disrupting. We're rethinking the water use and the yield. I mean, yeah, there's dare I say it, hundreds of companies who are trying to get in this space in some form or another, some form of technology. Like, you know, in the last year, I've probably been reached out by maybe 24 LED companies from China alone who wanted me to use their product, and I don't use grow lights, you know. So there's a lot of interest in a lot of different components of it, but the nut hasn't been fully cracked yet. You know, like, what is scale? Like, going to scale. Well, for me, my minimum economically viable scale is around 3 acres. You know, I'm pitching the 10-acre farm in one location. And actually, I pitched this recently to a former head of a major investment group here in LA, and he said, okay, that's fantastic. So how do we get to 1,000 acres? And I said, well, I was like, who has 1,000 acres in North America? Well, besides no one, the largest greenhouse producer in North America has about 250 acres. So why are we talking about 1,000? That's a $1 billion business. I mean, I'm happy to have a conversation, but it hasn't been achieved yet by even large public companies. So, and then you think about it from a different perspective, that the U.S. is just antiquated in almost everything we do in some ways, in particular as greenhouse production. That you look at the number of acreage that's currently under glass or plastic here in North America, in the U.S., about 8,500 hectares. Where in China, they have like 1.2 million hectares. So we haven't begun to do climate control environment, which has been around for like 35 years or whatever long, actually, I don't know, however you define it. So I think just playing catch up will be a nice disruption to begin with.
Well, I think initially we have to dare to be small, especially when we're looking at agriculture. It's massive. I mean, it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry globally. In the U.S., it's several $100 billion. Let's get to 0.1% first, and then let's get to 1%, and then we can look at the word disruption. I think initially it's going to happen in small pockets, or especially around the perishable crops, like lettuce. A lot of our tomatoes are already grown in hothouses, in greenhouses, and they're in the mainstream distribution chain. They're in all your retail stores. You may not know it, but that's where they come from. So it's going to happen in waves, and like I said before, I don't think there's going to be a complete disruption. I think it's going to be a combination of different types of technologies and production systems working together to create a robust food system. It's never going to make sense for us to grow a tree to get an orange. We're really looking at those high turn, fast growth crops like lettuce and leafy greens. So I think it's going to segregate, and the different production systems are going to target where they're most efficient and most effective. So I think it's going to be a multifaceted system in the long run.
When I think about that conversation earlier about beef, you know, grass-fed beef, and like, you know, that's, how do we take grass-fed beef to scale? I mean, that just seems like a horror story. Like, why on earth would we want to do that? You know, premium beef should be premium priced so that we don't eat very much beef. You know, like, why do we want to get everything into Walmart? If you want to be disruptive, we don't want to distribute through Walmart. We want to decentralize the entire system. And so technologies that allow you to have minimum economically viable scale operations, whichever method you choose, local, you know, on a rooftop of a supermarket or in conjunction with the restaurant chain, that is how you do that. We don't, like, everything we need to know to succeed in this world is right here. It's just a question of who has the will to take it on, and I think we'll take it one step at a time. So,
Let me ask that slightly differently then. Can you imagine a system, a model, that could be packaged so that those who want to farm in an urban environment using these techniques and these systems could essentially buy in, let's say, a licensing deal or a franchise model with the understanding that the economics of running that pencil out, that it's a proven model, so they can produce a predictable product at a predictable profit, given the local market supports it. So essentially taking the franchise model and applying it to urban farming.
Well, and I don't know how many of you were on the tour yesterday. I missed it, but I know you guys visited the container farm in downtown. And I think that type of model could work. But if you give someone a box, even if it can grow thousands of heads of lettuce a month, must be operated with an expert knowledge today. So in order to create that scalable model, you need to build in the level of automation to make this type of farming system accessible to anybody. Instead of needing a PhD in botany and chemistry managing a farm, how do you make this accessible to your traditional farmer or to your, I don't want to say layperson, but someone who has no professional farming background? How do you make this technology more accessible? Our answer is through automation, and we're doing the R&D today to optimize, the growing conditions for a whole host of crops. Once you've done that, then you can package that product and deliver it in a wider scale. But today it is still cost prohibitive for most people and knowledge prohibitive for most people. So I think translating that into a turnkey solution that could be delivered to anyone, anywhere, that's what it's going to take. And I think we're a little ways away from that today.
I would argue you can. That's certainly our business model. Not the licensing aspect, but taking a package and replicating in other places. Now there's, you do have to take into certain accounts, like humidity isn't the same everywhere you go. So if you build a greenhouse in Southern California where it's really dry, you may need to incorporate either different operating procedures and or different technology depending on if you go into the south and humidity is greater. We don't have snow here, so your greenhouse doesn't have to worry about snow, even though the county of San Diego says it does. But you do have to worry about that if you go to New England or whatever the case may be. So there are some differences in those models, but I think the overall package can be replicated. We're certainly betting on that. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about if the market can support it. So it's not just about can I bring this technology somewhere else and get it to work. I think you can, as long as there's a marketplace to move that product.
So my dreamy wish for all of you is that, by next year, there's a model that can accommodate the product needs of one tender greens and is ready to scale for an entire region with a view towards the future where we could scale across the country. Is that a dreamy wish, or is that something that we could make reality, and therefore creating the market for the farmers?
I mean, you mentioned the word franchise earlier. That's what our model will be for expansion. It's like I plan to sell food once in my life and then sell technology after that. It turns out that I teach this class for recreational aquaponics, and it turns out the commercial aquaponics is just that much more complicated. And the learning curve, if you got to start from zero and you want to do commercial aquaponics, I'm learning every day. I will be learning for the rest of my life. So how do you get people to implement this starting from scratch? Yes, we're going to do education. Yes, we're going to do vocational training. We'll do boot camps, all these things. But ultimately, if you can give them the complete playbook, from technical design to how do you get GAP certification, and organic comes with organic certification, and all the process of how you track it. I mean, everything it's the turnkey solution. How can you do that? That's a proven model. McDonald's perfected it. Where you'd like to do that for farming. And the beauty about it is that we don't have to be this big corporate, structure that's dominating food. We can actually keep it decentralized, allow people to own their systems. And we do take a fee to help them be successful. In fact, we have a vested interest in their success, but it's ultimately their farm.
Got it.
I was just going to say, we're already working on it, and hopefully early next year, we'll have shovels in the ground, build out more greenhouse space to service your customers.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have a big announcement next year, 2015 Seedstock. We'll have a scalable model to launch.
It's a deal.
So we're about to go to questions. I just wanted to give the group an opportunity with some final thoughts. So, Colin, if you want to.
I guess my final thought is just keep in mind that everybody has kind of a right to try to farm. Not everybody has a right to succeed in farming. So, you know, and Mr. Smith talked about this earlier. It's tough, and every day it's work, and even if you're property capitalized and all this stuff, you're going to be putting in a lot of work and have failure on the way. So anticipate that. But ultimately, there's a ton of opportunity here. The organic market is huge, the 14% compounded annual growth rate. The buy local, and although definitions float, that market's huge as well. And it's underserved. Both those markets are underserved. And so those are great areas to tap into. Not to say that it's easy, because anything but just keep focused on it and keep moving forward. And I think you'll find that you'll reach there someday.
It's sort of a new thing for me to say. But not only do I want to be a farmer, but I want to be a fish farmer too. And I've been fishing, been part of my system for years, and I have 24-inch catfish in my system right now. But the real opportunity one real opportunity is, and not just in like delivering food to niche markets, but actually to feed people locally, is to rethink about aquaculture in the U.S. We have a $10 billion trade deficit. 90% of our fish is imported from places where you just have no control whatsoever in highly unsustainable practices. So we can raise fish differently. Aquaculture left the U.S. because of the cheap cost imports, and aquaculture is largely a failed industry here in North America. But if you look at aquaculture as an insular industry, yeah, it's hard to make it work. But if you look at it in conjunction with this beautiful sewage treatment plant called fish effluents, which everybody wants to have, we can couple that with another type of revenue system called plant production. Suddenly, the economics make a lot more sense. And so to bring fish home, varieties that, if you go to Whole Foods, there's only like 5 varieties of fish on the ice there. And guess what? The ocean is full of fish. And there's lots of varieties we can bring that, just like you have heirloom tomatoes, we can bring sort of exotic species that are actually going to be more nutrient dense, rich in omegas, fed a truly organic diet, and delivered live or freshly harvested, same day. And I'm excited to play a role in that.
Yeah, I would say 2 things about that. One, I completely agree. We have to solve our fish issues. And then secondly, it's important, if you're in the fish business and you're selling it for food, you don't want to get too attached to your catfish. You're going to eventually have to.
Yeah, they outgrow the system. They outgrow me. Actually, just one plug to Paula Daniels. I wouldn't be as obsessed with aquaculture now if it wasn't for her. She's the founder of Los Angeles Food Policy Council, and she actually spent the last 2 years working on a report called specific on aquaculture. So if anyone's interested in the economics of aquaculture, it's the report is published online. It's called Know Your Fish Farmer. Does anybody know? Is it Know Your Fish Farmer? Mm-hmm. Know Your Fish Farmer, and it has all the data about all the horrible things that are going on in the world, and how exciting it could be if we can bring it back home through things like aquaponics.
Eric.
Final thought, let's innovate. Let's all continue to innovate. These challenges are so broad and complex, and the food system is so massive, it's going to take all of us. Not any one individual, not one individual organization, not any one individual technology. It's going to take all of us trying to innovate and find new solutions to these old standing challenges. From the technology side, from the distribution side, how do we penetrate underserved markets? How do we find ways to work with the policymakers to remove roadblocks and create opportunities in places there weren't before? And how do we find new ways to do business together? Find new customer contracts to enable financeable business models. Let's find solutions, let's do it together, and let's keep these conversations going.
Thank you, guys, and I want to thank everybody for listening today and invite you all to participate in I think what is an important movement. If there are any questions, please come to one of the mics on the side, and we're happy to field them.
I think everybody's asleep. My basic question is on the capital cost. Have you attempted to figure out the per unit capital cost of dollars per ton of produce or anything of that nature compared to conventional agriculture?
Can you rephrase the question in terms of startup capital or operating capital?
Total. If I have a ground-based farm, I've got land, I've got water infrastructure, I've got equipment, I've got storage, processing, that whole range of things. If I've got an aquaponic system or something else, I've got a whole other set of capital. And the problem is that the more capital I have, the less labor I can afford. So have you been able to make any kind of comparison?
When you ask that question, the only thing I can think of is more questions. Trying to compare two farms is tough because you got to figure out, well, what are you selling? What's the value of the product? What are the inputs? But you can certainly find, UC Davis has done a bunch of cost share studies, and you can compare the two different types of models. And so I think that's been done. I haven't done it personally.
I've done it personally. I spent 2 years with my wife, who works in corporate finance, and she manages these multi-billion-dollar budgets for a living, and she allows me to do anything I want to do in the world as long as it pencils out. And so, and to that point, I had to basically make things fit into a model that she created. So if you ever want to talk offline, I can help to give you specific questions. I thought that I could actually just give a template out there. It turns out everything affects the model dramatically, like what you're growing, where you're producing, what type of greenhouse you're going to be using, indoor, outdoor, what your distribution market is, how you value labor, what are you actually going to pay them. There's a number of drivers that affect the needle in many different directions. But if you want to give me specifics, I'll give you some specific answers.
Is there an optimized sort of version? What are you seeing in your? Sorry. Is there a model that you look at and go like, okay, your highest margins are going to be selling this type of produce?
Well, we all know where the highest margins are, right? So it's just. But the second to that, right? Yeah, and then that. So so putting aside medicinal things, it's you start it's like value per pound, or tomatoes grow at a certain rate and you can get a certain yield per square foot, but you can get a higher turnover for leafy greens. So leafy greens actually they're a lower value product, but they get a lot more of them, and so it's like boom, 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 conveyor belt. It's just mass production. So it really depends on what you're growing. The real value is where you can get high production at a high value crop. So basil, for example, is infinitely more grows basil. But if you go shiso, for example,
Great basil,
shiso is
thank you.
even more valuable than basil. But the Japanese markets can't handle it. It's like a Japanese mint. It's like $1 per leaf if you Google it, right? But anyways, in niche markets you can find these high cash crops. But as far as like a mass product thing, I think I'm looking at just staples and how you do high turnover.
I would just say that I think that the largest controlled environment farms, whether it's in North America or in Europe, are typically growing tomatoes and peppers. So that tends to be, if you can finance several acres of high-end greenhouses, that tends to be the optimized market at this point.
$35 to $50 a square foot is about what most greenhouses get, from what I've seen. I think some of the lower tech, less automation ones, closer to 20 to 25. So you can ask different people what the scale is required to maximize economics, but that's generally the capex up front.
Got me curious. I'm going to crunch some numbers here.
Sir, did you have a question?
Yes.
You're up.
I'm fascinated, and it's, of course, generating so many more questions and thoughts about our thinking in agriculture in the 21st century. So,
Raise a roof for biodynamic farming.
woo woo! I learned from my first mentor before I set out to grow food that as farmers, what we're doing is growing soil. And here I am talking to all-stars growing in soilless mediums. So I want to recognize my bias as a soil grower, as a compost maker, and a vegetable grower in the skin of the earth. That I have a bias, but I want to ask you about two things. One that has to do with that, another that doesn't. The first one is, is the carbon footprint, or the footprint of the operation. So great merit that these systems use disproportionately less water, but they are also disproportionately heavy in other resources and non-renewable resources. And so I'm curious to know about your concerns and challenges and ethics behind the footprint of these operations, where your materials come from, what that looks like, and that, you know, that offset relationship. And then the other question I have is about the vitality of our food. So the greatest soil scientists in the world know that there is so much more about this extraordinary ecosystem that is the skin of our earth that we can't identify, that we don't know about. There's so much more that we don't know about our soil than what we do. And so one way to say it is, well, it takes a lot of chutzpah, a lot of nerve, to think that we can mimic all that's going on in the soil, you know, much broader than even the spectrum of microbiology and nutrients and minerals and forces in the biodynamic realm, to simply, you know, drop stuff in the water, have fish poop fertilize it. So I'm curious to know about your challenges, concerns, and ethics behind how this food is grown. I want to say one more quick thing that Rudolf Steiner...
Can we just start with the first two questions, and then we'll see where that goes?
Yeah, carbon footprint, vitality of the food, and vitality of the food having to do with the skin of the earth, and us being concerned about not having that vitality anymore because the skin of the earth is depleted of nutrients, and so how we supply that to our food that we're growing with other mediums, and if in fact that's even there, whether it's quantified by science or not.
All right, thank you.
Going back to concern about, you know, environmental stewardship, I think that's a real question. It's something I'm very concerned about, and that's why I chose controlled environments. Not only do we save a lot of water, but you got to make sure you're doing a apples to apples comparison. A lot of times you look at it per acre. What's the energy use per acre? That's the wrong comparison. What you need to be looking at is energy use per head of lettuce, or energy use per basil unit, or whatever that case may be. And then you find that the fact that on a per acre basis in controlled environments, you're doing multiple times more than a conventional soil farmer. If you break down the energy use and carbon use per unit, typically you find that greenhouse production in soils agriculture is more efficient. But I also think, one, most of what we use is electricity, and there's innovative power plants, I should say, you can incorporate with controlled environments now to offset that. The other use is plastic, right? We use a lot of plastic. One, I think technology is going to find plant-based plastics that we can utilize. And two, I brought this up to somebody in agriculture. I was like, yeah, one downside about greenhouse, we use a lot of plastic. He said, well, you know how much plastic soil farmers uses for plastic mulch? We're talking about millions of acres across the world for plastic mulch to suppress weeds and stuff like that. And they only use that for one season, sometimes a portion of a season, where we're using our plastic for many years. And so I think that is a concern of mine. We're always looking for ways to be more innovative and be more resourceful, and we'll continue to do so. Going back to concerns of soil biology and the lack of, or the perceived lack of in soilless systems, I would say that there isn't a lack of. In fact, we do everything we can to increase biology and diversity within our greenhouses, being that we are hydro-organic. We use things like compost teas and certain types of inoculants to ensure there's biodiversity so they can degrade organic matter and convert it to solubilized plant foods that the plants can consume, just like what happens in soils. We use beneficial insects and biological pest control methods and so forth.
So getting to the environmental point, and I can't claim to have a full life cycle analysis of conventional compared to the types of technologies working here. But if you look at the water consumption, especially here in California, more than half of the water used, and I think this might be also translate globally, goes towards agriculture. And then if you look at the amount of energy it takes to move that water from the Colorado River over the mountains and then distribute it throughout the production system, it's massive. And especially when today our grid energy is not clean, we still have a lot of coal fueling that. Doing even a full carbon footprint for traditional farming is very complex, and it is not very clean when you get into the details. So I think it's a very complex issue, and I don't have a good answer for you. But I think the water savings does drive a lot of those benefits on the environmental side.
Such a loaded question, man. We've talked about this a year
And I'm
ago.
really humbled, and I know that it's going to take everybody in all technologies and more that we haven't even thought of yet, Eric. And I so appreciate all your comments on this. I tried my best not to make it loaded, but I'm really concerned with the vitality of the food. How can I ask it in a more humble way?
Okay, you don't care about the water food web compared to the soil.
And
food
we're
web,
friends, so
right?
this
We're
is all
friends.
about
We love each other. But I'll say okay. Here, so look, biodynamic farming. I know we have some great friends in the biodynamic space. It's not going to scale in the city yet. You know, not going to feed the city, but it's absolutely an amazing way to grow food. And growing food in the soil is the most amazing way to grow food. Period. Okay. The question is like, how do I make my wife happy, right? And so she says no. Okay, it doesn't pencil. Okay, so I'll finish answering your question this way. So I gave a tour to some 1% and 1%ers who wanted to come in. They wanted to have a greenhouse for their golf course, their club, whatever. And I said, okay, this is great. I can get a little contract here, a consulting gig. And they came in here, and I had more Italian cars show up at my place than I ever possibly could have imagined, and rubies, you know. And I said, they came in here,
and not Fiats, right?
Are those Italian? No, I'm talking about the 12-cylinder kinds, you know. They came in and they experienced shock and awe. Like, looked at my place where usually people are happy. They just like, this place is a dump, you know. And they quickly try to run away as fast. So my friend was on the board, and he's a trained he's a chef in France for years, and he knows food. And you know, they basically ran away. They said, because the disconnect was, they said, wait a minute, did you think we actually were going to eat the food that we were going to grow to feed our little cafe at the golf course? And I was like, why else would you do it? But they wanted to look like they were growing their own food for their golf course. We're still going to buy from our local contractors, right? I was like, this is so stupid. Get out of here. We're done, okay? But my friend, who was his first visit there, he on his way out, I said, hey, just try this, okay? And anybody here had a green zebra? Yeah. Okay. Anybody had a yellow green zebra? Okay. If you leave the green zebra on the vine, it turns yellow. If you leave the yellow green zebra on the vine a little bit longer, it turns pink. Has anybody had a pink green zebra? You've had a pink green zebra? Can you describe it? Can I help you? It is by far the most incredible orgasmic experience you'll ever have. And so this French-trained chef said, aha, now I understand why you're doing this. And then he left. So.
It sounds like you should feed your wife green zebras. She'll be happy.
Thank you. Touche.
Thank you, everybody. And, I'm sorry we're out of time, but you're... Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about that. Oh, yeah? Okay. You're up.
Yeah. I'm just curious if gray water or other types of not traditional water uses can be incorporated into aquaponics.
Not if you want to get food safety certification. Food Safety Modernization Act, I just don't see that happening anytime soon. Although who were talking earlier about it's AG, you're doing it. So I would defer to him. He's using a lot. Right, so your question was gray water, right?
Well, or any other alternative, non-traditional water sources.
Well, look, an aquaponic system is just a big sewage treatment plant, right? And biology doesn't discriminate against different types of organisms, however, people do, and therefore it'll never fly, so.
Thank you.